Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this evening. What is the research about? Well, as it says on the first slide, it's looking at that intersection between families of sanctuary and SEND. And the aim of this research has been to explore those narratives of families of sanctuary when accessing the education system here in England with a special needs child. But as the research has progressed and more areas and focus has been uncovered, the social and cultural context of the families has become more prominent. So actually, even though I've got the aims and the sub-aims here, actually it's the sub-aims that are gaining more prominence than the actual aim itself. So the exploration of social and cultural contexts of families of sanctuary has become more prominent, because I didn't want just to look at the experiences of the families. I actually wanted to explore the constructs behind those experiences. I also wanted to look at what support was available as well, and what support the participants recognised and responded to. And as I started this, it was very much focused on the professionals, the social workers, the refugee support workers, schools. But as the data was collected, as those conversations happened with those families, actually the influence of British families with SEND children with similar diagnoses actually became again more prominent. So as the research went on, more things appeared and gained prominence. Narratives within these areas are very much unheard. And so, that there is a growing body of research out there which explores educational journeys of sanctuary seeking children from the viewpoint of sanctuary seekers, so the neurotypical children, but there's also a growing sort of body of research which explores the educational journeys of sanctuary seeking children from the viewpoint of the professionals. But there is little in the way of research, either mainstream or special, where the narratives of the families and children are actually front and centre of the research, especially in the UK. And this corresponds to this global. This corresponds to the global research picture regarding families of sanctuary and SEND, so special educational needs and disabilities. But before I move on, Jerry sort of signposted the term sanctuary, and that was becoming more. It's become more deliberate as the research has progressed, because sanctuary for me, and the growth in the research of sanctuary has moved away from asylum, refugee, reunification families, and has refocused the picture on the purpose of the journey, not on the identifying label that's given by the United Nations. So throughout this research, I have used the term families of sanctuary deliberately to step away from this quite purgative label of asylum, refugee. And actually the families that participated within the research are not all refugees or asylum seekers. So I've got some refugees, some asylum seekers, some families that have come on reunification, and one participant who was trafficked. So there was multiple sort of layers there. And so Families of Sanctuary has sought to not homogenize that or give an umbrella term, but it's trying to redefine that focus from the label to the purpose of the journey. So why did I want to focus on why did I want to put families in front and centre? Well, research with sanctuary seekers is not a new phenomenon. Okay, it's been around for a number of years, and multiple areas have been explored on a European and a global scale. But if we just focus on sanctuary seekers, we are at risk of homogenizing their experiences and marginalizing those other experiences within this broad umbrella term. And so, you know, the narratives of the families of sanctuary are so important of this. And research by Banker, Narwick and Gatchell suggests that oral history of the sanctuary seeker is such a rich and powerful method by which to uncover both those personal and collective histories. There is no singular sanctuary story. Okay, there's multiple individual voices which each tell their own story. And so from that, I really wanted to place the families of sanctuary as centre to this study, just to try and uncover these multiple complexities and in these complex lives. But in this, I don't want to dismiss the collective experiences, because there are millions of sanctuary seekers globally. There are collective experiences out there. But for the purposes and for the word counts and the study for the thesis, I need to gatekeep. I need to put a barrier around what it is that I'm looking at. So I've very much focused on those individual stories, those individual voices. So the methodology I've taken on, as I said earlier, I wanted to uncover what constructs lie underneath those experiences. So I very much went down the constructivist route, and to acknowledge and understand that their experiences are constructed through their interactions with others. The families that took part in the research, so I had 8 families. They were all situated within multiple constructs. So home, culture, send, UK-based culture, faith, etc. And so these multiple constructs that the families were living in, both simultaneously and partially, competed with each other and gave rise to tensions and in some cases hope. So it was very, very diverse, the research that was coming out from this. The intersectionality bit, again, yeah, if we just look at sanctuary seekers, we fail to understand and realise the voices of sanctuary seekers, and gender, voices of sanctuary seekers, and ethnicity, voices of sanctuary seekers, and so it was that intersectional narrative that I really wanted to explore as part of this. And then finally, I very much wanted to focus on that retrospective experience. Ethically, our families, sorry, the families that took part in the research, you know, it wasn't a fine-tuned experience of coming, getting a definite leave to remain, finding somewhere to live, etc., etc. It was a very complex situation for them at the time, and so, you know, affording the participants some emotional distance for what could have been a troubled time in their lives, was very much part and parcel of the ethical sort of framing that I wanted to take for this. And so that's why I looked at the retrospective experience. And also it was really interesting because it gave them a chance to reframe what they went through then within a new construct, within a new sort of lens, for example. So that was interesting. So, but, you know, many of the participants talked about, well, I thought that then, but now I know. So that was really interesting. So with all that in mind, I opted for an episodic interview. So, but before I interviewed the participants, I met and chatted with all the potential participants within the study. And so this ranged from north of England right down to the south east of England. I undergone 2 pilot studies. my idea to begin with was to look at the narrative, pure and simple. However, there was challenges with that. All the participants within the study had really big lives. Anyone could have made a film. They were just really sort of quite, sort of this massive picture that they were portraying. So the narrative gave rise to many challenges for them and for me. We struggled with knowing where to start with those stories, where to start with those narratives. And so, I wanted to dig a lot deeper than semi-structured. I could have gone down semi-structured narratives, but actually I chose the episodic interview approach because that enabled this funneling of a bound narrative, which sort of had a distinct start, middle, and end to it. So it starts off with a general description, asking a question about general description. So in this case, tell me about your child, about your child's disability, for instance, and then opting for a more concrete exploration, and then more abstract. So can you tell me about your thoughts, your constructions when you found out about your child's disability, and so it funnels down. So it actually gave me some structure, as well as the participants some structure. So I undertook 2 pilot studies. One was pure narrative, so with those challenges there, and one was with an interpreter. And again, for ease, and actually the participants in the research were offered the use of a translator, and actually all of them decided they wanted to actually do the interviews in English. So 8 interviews with participants, episodic style interviews, each took around 30 to 40 minutes. Okay, I opted for the Brown and Clark thematic analysis approach. So themes were generated through both semantic and latent coding. So there's no prioritization of coding. Semantic codes, which are on the left, sort of generated through the explicit meaning of the data. So there's much more that descriptive analysis of the findings. The latent coding, that was more sort of my interpretation, that to the uncovering of hidden meanings and underlying assumptions that informed the semantic coding. So there's no prioritization with the actual coding structure there. Okay, they were simply sort of generated sort of as and when appropriate. But the semantic and the latent codings, they then sort of funneled into the 4 themes of homogenization, connection, culture, and aspiration. So homogenization was one of the first themes that I sort of focused on with the actual analysis themselves. The challenge for all families of sanctuary who are not white and European is this homogenization by the West of culture, ethnicity, religion, and assumptions made on them based on this normative framing. The participants felt that the actual initial SEND assessments that they went through were often clouded by assumptions and preconceived ideas based on this these different labels that they possess. So, for instance, immigration, cultural background, English as an additional language. So for Camilla here, she came when her daughter was in key stage 1, and she got diagnosed in key stage 5 with autism, because the assumption was, because she was a refugee, that the child was suffering from trauma, and so that the entire focus for that entire time, even through CAMS, etc., was that she had her child had post-traumatic stress disorder. and nobody really thought about autism or something else. And so in Camilla's words, that we came here, she wouldn't play. Camilla didn't know. The school teachers kept referring to PTSD. Nobody really thought that she had autism. They say because she came from, as a refugee, that she had trauma. So there was this distinct bias there for all the participants within this regarding the background, regarding the labels that they had then of refugee, asylum, trafficked, etc. That, you know, these assumptions were made based on those labels. For many of the families, because, you know, some of them have been in the UK for quite some time, 5, 6 years before having a child. So some of my families came with a child. Some of my families actually had a child whilst in the UK. That the assumption was because they'd been in the UK for quite some time, that actually they were fine, that they didn't need that extra support. So for Danny, the assumption has been, you know, was that because she'd been in the UK for quite a while, her English was quite sufficient. And so the professionals working with and alongside Danny felt that she actually just needed little explanation around actually quite complex terminology with regards to the education, health and care plans. And so because of that, because she didn't really understand, because she didn't have that agency and she didn't have that understanding or confidence to actually ask questions, vital information was missed for Danny. In addition to the EAL, there was also the challenge for one of the families. So Dania, was the challenge for her was the education as English as additional language, but also Dania had a completely different paradigm. And so Dania, whose framing of the term disability stemmed from strong cultural and familial roots, was more than confused by this constant use of the term disability. And she was quite convinced, you know, her child did not have a disability. And so I asked her, you know, what do you understand by the term disability? And she said, well, it's people in wheelchairs. And actually, her child had a severe speech and language disability, aphasia. But because of this sort of framing that she had and this lack of understanding due to her levels of English, she completely sort of misunderstood what was happening regarding speech and language therapy reports and educational health and care plan reports, and was actually in quite a bit of strong denial about this. And actually, when we talked it through, she finally understood, and it was almost like a breakthrough moment for her, that she could actually finally move on. And so, you know, we supported with paperwork, etc. on that. But, you know, it's this understanding that, you know, because some of the families have been in the country for quite some time, the level of English required to understand the education, health and care plan process is really complex. So even for the parents that have a good grasp of English, you know, it is absolutely exhausting. And so we, you know, the families were sort of put it into this category of, oh, you've been here quite a while, so therefore you don't need that support because your English will be fine. Other parents, they had their education, health and care plans translated through Google Scholar. So for one of the areas of need in short-term targets, which should have read as Jenny will load the dishwasher twice a week. It came out under Google Translator, Jenny will get into the dishwasher twice a week. And it's just this real sort of lack of understanding by the professionals regarding English levels on behalf of the parents. There was lots came from that theme there. The second theme was connections, and, you know, supportive relationships are a key part to fitting in for all of us. but for families of sanctuary with SEND children, so children with SEND, there are multiple challenges. All the parents within the research, all the participants, regarding their children and friendships, were more inclined to seek connections with the children with the same diagnosis as their child. Although this was a challenge due to the additional group memberships of ethnicity and sanctuary, this resulted in this pragmatic filtering of where they could go with their child, where their child actually felt comfortable. And so, that was really important for the parents to actually have that connection with somebody. They were keen to point out, all the families were keen to point out that life here was better than what they had, although I was really cautious about going down that route because I didn't want it to be us and them approach to the actual sort of discourse. All the families had an absence of extended family, which was, for any of us, it's a real struggle when we haven't got that support mechanisms there. However, they did all say that actually they did feel included within their school communities, and actually were very much inclined, and did say, actually mentioned, but we talked about who would you turn to in times of need. They all mentioned the school as the first port of call. So actually, they very much valued that relationship they had with the school. Alia there, she talked about the fact that she struggled within her community. So Ali was from the Yemeni community, and so she found it difficult to socialise with friends from her community, and thus sought sort of friendships for her child through the school and through community centres that catered for young autistic individuals, because actually she felt more comfortable with young people and families that had a child with the same or similar diagnosis. In the early days for the participants, they didn't want to make a fuss, and that came out really clear within their narratives. Families of sanctuary, when they come to the UK, work with multiple different people, and it's really difficult to actually establish any working relationship in those early days, and certainly since the implementation of the dispersal policies that we have here in the UK, families can actually find themselves being moved at quite short notice. So those limited relationships fed this lack of trust when working with and alongside professionals, and so they didn't really want to ask for clarity. They were scared about asking for clarity. They didn't want to feel that they were being a burden on anybody that they were actually working with. And so Barbara, she talked about this whole thing that she just felt disempowered. So she knew the school wasn't right for her child, but she didn't want to fuss. And she said, I didn't understand. So I just sit and say, okay. She'd rather be compliant than actually ask those questions. And for a lot of the participants, it was actually that fear of being rejected or being kicked out of a situation. So for the supporting sort of group around the families, there was multiple on school gate friendships formed. Because of the fear of the status of the professional, they felt that parents with a child with the same or similar condition, diagnosis, they felt that it was a non-threatening relationship, and non-intrusive. So they were able to get that support in a safe way. And it's those quality of friendships and quality of connections that really support the overall quality of inclusion and well-being for those families. A large part in the mandate from the UN is about family reunification and the importance of family for refugee families, refugee seekers and asylum seekers, etc. However, for sanctuary seekers with a child with a disability, it's more than a complex situation. You know, the families that I spoke to had very much, you know, a different framing of disability. So when family came to this country who had a very different viewpoint, those dynamics became quite strained. So we had very different paradigms between generations of families. And Arash, you know, he felt, you know, even though he had a brother over here, he didn't want to share his problems. You know, he didn't want family to visit and share. He didn't want to share those experiences because of very different framings from between him and his brother. So that was a real challenge. So it's not always a positive for families to come over. Although on the surface for us it seems like it's great because, you know, we've got this extra layer of support for the families. Actually, you know, it can cause more tension and problems for the parents of the children. And so that's something we need to be more mindful of. The bulk of the literature on refugees and asylum seeking families and families of sanctuary focuses on acculturation. But actually, as I dug deeper and listened to the recordings multiple times and read the transcripts, it was really more about enculturation. So it's only when we are exposed to a new way of thinking do we become aware of how we ourselves think. So there's much written about acculturation and sanctuary. So acculturation is that awareness and absorption of new cultures, and very much for sanctuary seekers broadly, there are multiple challenges to suddenly, you know, finding yourself into a new culture, a new system, a new way of thinking. However, for the families that took part in this research, that didn't give the tension for them. It was that growing awareness of their own cultures, that enculturative processes that they were going through, that actually gave rise to those tensions. And the combination of enculturation, awareness of their own cultures, and awareness of new cultures in acculturation gave, you know, that gave that real tension. There was that real tension there between these two processes, that these two psychological processes that were happening. Okay, so that was really, that sort of came out of this research for me. So the reflection on past family events for Camilla, that gave her blueprints, because she didn't know her daughter was autistic until the actual diagnosis happened. But she sort of looked back on those historical events when some years ago a nephew was suggested to have some sort of disability, and she talked about the fact her family wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't discuss it. It was all very hush hush, and this actually laid that blueprint for how Camilla dealt with this contemporary news of her daughter having a diagnostic criteria of autism, stating that, you know, the old habits that she had, that internal working model, was really hard to change. And she says, you know, she didn't know how to behave. So once her daughter got that diagnosis of autism, she didn't know how to behave around her, and she tried to understand her, but she recognized that she had these old habits and these old framings. As I talked about earlier of the tension, so I talked about this family, that there's family sort of tension there regarding the family reunification, how that's positive mental health, and how family reunification could support that successful integration for families, although for the families in the research, differences in their frameworks around disability often led to tensions and isolation for the parents. So Alia was talking there about, she was very proud of her Eat Money culture, but she grew more aware and angry that her son was not accepted in her culture, and then she chose deliberately then to socialise with English friends. So that was really insightful for Ali. She got quite upset the fact that on the one hand she had this pride in this strong cultural framing, however for her child it was more than negative. So much of the research on families as sanctuary is about negativity, deficits, and needs. However, my families were really agentic, and they describe, all of them, describe their changing awareness, their changing sort of paradigms. They demonstrated knowledge and self-reliance, even though the situations were and are still really complex. Camilla there, she was motivated to go on to training courses about autism and mental health through her local community centre. And that she described how that helped her understand actually what autism is and how to deal with it. I'm just going to skip past Barbara for a second, go on to Alia. She felt that under her old life, her child really didn't have a future, and so when she talked to the teacher about sort of future plans and what happens post 16, etc. And her child said, he wanted to go and work in Subway. She couldn't believe it, and so she spoke to the teacher, and she's like, yeah, he can do this. So it was very different from Ali's experiences, and that that's the fact that her child had future, the child had reason and purpose, gave her this massive sense of hope and aspiration for the future. And agency is really complex. So we talk about agentic individuals. Traditionally, it's been aligned with having power to make decisions and capacity, and very much families are limited with that. However, for Barbara, I actually want to sort of draw to this because this really sort of summed it up, that globally there are millions of women out there who have special needs children who are blamed for their condition. And the biggest thing for Barbara was actually, she recognised she didn't know much. She did not know about disability. Now she doesn't know much, but she recognised that it wasn't her fault. And that for her was huge. Barbara was trafficked. She had very little agency in her entire life. But to actually have that, be able to stand up and go, this is not my fault, was absolutely massive for Barbara. And that actually sort of, just that knowledge there actually sort of set goosebumps for me, because that's so powerful for Barbara to have that. So under the traditional umbrella of agency, does Barbara have much agency? No. However, I think with this, she has a lot of agency, that she can actually stand up and understand, where she is coming from with support from her daughter. So, original contributions at the moment, it's about the utilisation narratives. Okay, so these narratives will frame and build new understandings that shine a light on the tensions and barriers faced by families at sanctuary as a result of the inequitable position influenced by their intersectionality. This research covers an under-researched group. Okay, there's very little out there regarding SEND and sanctuary, especially here in England. There's a conceptual gap, so this growing awareness of enculturation, okay, is something that's, it's not really talked about it in sanctuary research. It's more about acculturation. I've utilised the fact that we've gone to I've used retrospective narratives and utilised juries, the utilisation of interaction, continuity, and situation, and the structures and the multiple structures and the agency that gives the individuals through memory and past experiences. And then the methodological gap, the use of episodic intersectional narratives. So hopefully that's my original contribution to this underexplored area. And that's it. Thank you.
Wendy, that was really interesting. And just before thank you, Charlotte. Just before I turn the recording off and open to the chat, just wanted to pull together some of the thoughts that had really struck me. And I think it was about some of the common themes that you raised that I recognised in the sanctuary seekers literature and in the inclusion and special needs literature, but then some of those distinctive themes that come as almost the Venn diagram of the way these two overlap. So, Debs and I will recognise parents debating the usefulness of the term disability and whether they connect with it or not, just as you described that with your parents. In the sanctuary seekers literature, there's so much written about asylum seeker gratitude, not wanting to make a fuss in a new country. And so again, but this point that you have raised so beautifully about the culture and the way that families are sitting, or individuals and women and mothers are sitting in two cultures, understanding something from the perspective of the culture that they were perhaps in, but now in a new and different culture, and able to look at future plans. It's fabulous. And as you said about Barbara, that was really, really powerful. And we'll, as she talks about not being blamed from a woman that has had to put up with so much. So thank you, Wendy, so much for so many distinctive discussions. I'm going to stop the recording now. Bear with me while I just do that.